The first ever solar panel cell was created more than 80 years ago. And like many other innovations, it was created by pure accident. Yet since then, those signature rectangular structures can be spotted on the roofs of houses and buildings all over the world. In fact, the number of US solar panel installations is 23 times higher today than in 2014. While this is a clear win for environmental sustainability, it remains near impossible to measure and manage one's clean energy consumption with solar panels alone. So, with more than a third of the world's population calling apartment buildings their home, many consumers lack easy access to clean energy altogether. Hello, I am your host, Mike Lake, and in today's preview, I will be talking with Steve Hoy, CEO of Enosi, a company working to solve these shortcomings in the renewable energy industry by providing energy traceability tools to deliver clean energy to households and apartment communities alike.
Innovation, resiliency, discovery. Join Mike Lake, President and CEO of Leading Cities, as we explore the technologies shaping the possibilities of our future with a preview of tomorrow.
Hello and welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Preview of Tomorrow. And of course, I want to welcome all of our guests, whether they're listening or watching this video. I'd love to introduce you all to Steve Hoy. Steve is the CEO of Enosi, a company working to provide widespread access and traceability of renewable energy from solar and wind farms. Now, Steve, this is obviously a big issue, but what makes you passionate about renewable energy?
Look, yeah, the whole reason we're kind of doing this is because I think that we're not doing enough, basically, to save the planet. I had a long career in the power industry, 35 years or so, working with power companies and as a consultant in the industry. In the end, I wanted to do something that's more directly making a difference, and I think that this idea is doing it. And I'm kind of frustrated by greenwashing as well.
I hear you there. So, I mean, for anybody who's listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, we're all guilty. We're all consuming our energy. And very few of us, if any, really know where that energy is coming from, right? I mean, if you have a solar panels or if you're off the grid, maybe, but the rest of us, we're just getting electricity and have no idea.
Exactly. It's coming at what we call the grid mix. Unless you could live in Iceland, that's another place, 100% renewable there. There are a few places on the planet that are like that, where you can be reasonably confident the energy you're buying is renewable. But for most of us, you're right. Energy is being poured in by the generators into the grid, and we're taking it. Often we're measuring how much we're using, but what we're not doing is actually differentiating where we're buying our energy from. So that's what we can do, and it means that we can take action to buy energy from a source that you know to be renewable. That's what we're after.
And so really what we as consumers lack is a simple way of being able to choose. Is that right? I mean,
yeah, it's not. It's just about choice, but it's also about your retail energy supplier giving you that choice and separating. They buy a bunch of energy from different generators, right? So what they need to do is say to you, okay, I've got all this energy. I'm buying some from a wind farm. I'm buying some from solar. I'm buying some from coal generation, gas generation, whatever it is, and to make it clear to customers, how much of the energy is coming from each of those, and to give them the choice. So if you want to buy more of the renewable, we'll do that for you. Right, we'll actually make that, and we'll allocate that energy to you first, and to others who haven't chosen that later. So that is the approach we're adopting here, and it means that customers who want to buy the renewable energy, who want that access to renewable sources, can go and do that. That's it.
So let me ask you. This might not be a fair question, but if I select that I want renewable energy. What's the chances that a supplier can kind of double dip? In other words, they buy some renewable from someone,
Yeah.
but they tell a lot of people that, oh yeah, we bought that from, solar and wind, and yet
Yeah.
90% of their actual portfolio is coal or whatever. I'm making that up.
Yeah, well, no, you're absolutely right, and it's it is the fundamental challenge of traceability is this avoiding double counting, and there are schemes in place to try to do it, and we set these things up many years ago. In Australia's case, about 25 years ago, usually of that order, 20 years ago, where there are these certificate schemes, the which can only be counted once, and they're good in that way, but the problem with certificate schemes is they don't settle on the same time period as the energy does. So essentially, we have this problem of uh, they you can create these certificates to say I've generated this much electricity, and then people who buy the certificates are allowed to say that they used your electricity. But because they're settled over an annual period, you can buy a bunch of certificates, let's say from a solar farm, right? Run your operations all night and tell the world that that was solar, right? Which this doesn't pass what we call the pub test in Australia. It's not logical, and of course it doesn't actually send the right signal into the market either. What we end up
Right.
with is too many solar investments and people buying those certificates trying to claim they're green. But in fact, what we need is resources to be available, at 8 p.m. on a winter's evening. That's when we need the wind to be blowing and to people to be allocated energy from there. So this what's called 24/7 carbon-free energy idea is we want to get our energy from the source, a renewable source, around the clock. And not just measured over an annual period and kind of offset with these certificates. And so that's what we're doing. We're making sure that you actually have a contract to buy the energy from the renewable source, and we're only matching that energy if it was actually available at the time.
Mhm.
Sun's behind the cloud. No, you didn't get the solar. It's nighttime. No, it wasn't solar, um, or the wind wasn't blowing. Then that's not a match. So what we're aiming is to show people what actually is happening out on the grid, and if they allocate their energy consumption to particular production, it still needs to be clear that the generation's only there when it's there, and you need to take action if you want to actually get your footprint down to actual zero, what we call true zero, as opposed to net zero. Then you need to actually contract with perhaps more than just a solar farm. You're going to need to have other sources, and that's what retailers can do for you.
So with you've kind of already said this, but just to put a very fine point on it, why would you say traceability is so critical to this energy transition?
Yeah, I think the main thing is the incentives need to be in the right place. What we need at the moment is resources that fill the gaps. We hear all the time, the intermittency of solar and wind and so forth is, therefore we can't replace our fossil fuel fleets because these things aren't available all the time. And I would agree, we do need things that are available all the time, and they need to be renewable as well. So what we actually need is a diversity of supply. So if the sun's not shining, I need there to be the wind blowing, or I need geothermal, I need hydro, or I need a storage resource. And so those resources that fill the gaps need to actually be incentivized, and people need to know that they need to do something about acquiring energy from those resources that fill the gaps, or else the incentive isn't there for the investment to be made in them.
So, and this is the point where Enosi comes in, right? Can you give us a sense of how, first of all, how does it work? How
Yeah,
does
okay. It's the first thing to get your head into. It's not physics, it's accounting. And I'm not going to profess that I can actually track an electron across the grid. In fact, electrons barely move, right? Because especially in an AC circuit, they're just oscillating like this.
Yeah.
There's no actual flow of that you can track. What you can do is measure the inputs and the outputs and allocate the inputs to the outputs. And that's what our software does. It's called Power Tracer. But what it's really doing is taking metering data. So electricity meters are installed at the generating sites. They're also installed at your place and every home and business around the world. And we're taking the measurement that we have in every typically half-hour period, so a 30-minute period. How much energy did you use? How much energy did the generator create? Or more to the point, how much energy did the generator create, and how much energy did these 1,000 customers use? And then allocate that energy to those customers who have a contract to buy it. So that's what we're doing. And if there's not enough energy to satisfy the demand of those 1,000 customers, then we have algorithms that share that out fairly, or first come, first serve, or various other mechanisms that you could apply. But the idea is that we're allocating the energy according to a contract with those people who have contract to buy it. And of course you buy energy through a retail supplier. So what we do is we install PowerTracer at the retail supplier. We integrate with their billing systems and their metering systems so that they can then execute that contract for you.
So in the end, PowerTracer is really empowering the end consumers, right? The energy purchaser, in more ways than one. They have a bit more understanding as to the allocation of energy to them and what that mix is. But they also are empowered to demand more of what renewable, which is certainly my
Yeah, and
focus.
we're starting,
Not many
and
people are
yeah,
demanding more coal, but
yeah, no, and we're starting to see it. So a whole bunch of companies around the world have subscribed to this idea of 24/7 carbon-free energy. So led by some of the big players in the tech sector. So Google, Microsoft, IBM have all declared that they're going to get their energy from a renewable source around the clock. Even the US government has declared that this is their goal by sometime in the 2030s, to eliminate fossil fuels from the mix entirely by using this 24/7 traceability. And so, yes, that gives buyers the opportunity to do that, and kind of go figure out what they have to do to fill the gaps. So that's where we're going. You start off measuring. I've got a contract with a wind farm. That's great. I might get you 60 or 70% renewable. What have I got to do to get the other 30%? That's what this is about.
so if you're a retail supplier, listening to you, I loved your description at the beginning that this is accounting, not physics.
Yeah.
And of course, all businesses have to, adhere to generally accepted accounting principles and
Sure.
and balance the books and whatnot. So it seems to me like this is a logical no-brainer. So my question is, why isn't every energy retail supplier, already doing this?
Well, of course they should be doing it, but it's actually quite hard, right? We're talking a many-to-many match of what can be very small amounts of energy. So we're talking about thousands of generators and their outputs being matched and allocated to the consumption of millions of consumers. That's a very hard algorithm, and so it's what we've built. But it's taken till now to have the smart metering data available, the processing power available to actually do that kind of calculation, and kind of a shift of business model as well, if you like, which has to kind of happen along the way, and that greater proliferation of renewables and the demand for it is also only just starting to appear in the market to make it worthwhile for retailers to do this. And so we're serving them. We're selling our product through to retailers, and they in turn create energy products that consumers can buy.
So I don't know. It's my sense that a tool like PowerTracer and that the empowerment that comes with traceability can really jumpstart, if not, really hit the turbo on the acceleration of the adoption of more renewable energy. What power does the end consumer have to expect or demand this kind of traceability?
Yeah, well, we're seeing people like local governments are starting to do things like write it into their RFPs. I want to know how much of my energy is actually being produced from the source that you're selling it from. So that's appearing as the first step. Just do the measurement. Then they're starting to say, okay, give me a portfolio of assets. Right, so the RFP comes out and says, okay, don't just give me a PPA, if you like, with a wind farm. I need a diversity of supply. And then the last thing that consumers can also do is start shifting their demand to when the renewable resources are actually available. And that, of course, really amps it up, because I can do things like, for in Google's case, pre-cool my data center when the wind's blowing overnight, and then not have to run the air conditioning through the course of the day, and it's being wind powered that way. They're doing things like shifting the computing load in one data center on the east coast of America to the west coast of America to follow the sun, so they can always have a renewable source powering their operations. So this is how we can really make a difference. And so we're aiming towards these things, and if the companies can set a goal of what we call true zero, to eliminate the fossil fuels from the mix altogether, then that is the goal that we're all after.
Fantastic. Well, I have one last question for you, which I ask every guest. Looking 10, 20, 50 years into the future, and assuming that Enosi is being used by every energy retailer out there, what does that mean? What does it mean to the end person, the end community, or the world as a whole?
I hate to do this to you, Michael, but there are two answers. There's the transition. As we still have fossil fuels in the mix, then what we're seeing, and Enosi users will see, our Power Trace users will see how much of their energy is coming from renewables, and they can start eliminating it. But eventually, we are going to eliminate fossil fuels. So if you go out 50 years, I think the world actually changes to a point where there's an awful lot of producers of energy, right? I've got solar on my roof. I'm pretty sure you do too. And so we have this distribution of generation. And in the end, what it is going to be a matching on a very large scale, many to many, as I said earlier, of where's my energy actually coming from. And I think we can start to have a broader community, if you like, of energy and a pool that we're all working in. So it's a different kind of world in energy. We're all prosumers. Our car and our homes are actually doing this for us. And I think that's the world that we have to head towards. And PowerTrace is positioned to do that by facilitating not just the match of the energy, but the pricing of it and trading of it.
Well, I started off by saying how, in fairness, we're all part of the problem, but with this, we can all be part of the solution, or at least know that we're part of the solution.
Exactly.
And so I'm grateful for the work that you do. I mean, this is really powerful, and I do hope that our listeners and viewers have really gotten a sense of just how empowering this type of technology, this tool can be for anybody. But I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us on this episode of Preview of Tomorrow.
It's been my pleasure, Michael.
And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Preview of Tomorrow. Listeners like you are essential to advancing our efforts to drive resiliency and sustainability for all. I ask that you give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whichever streaming platform you prefer. Your feedback helps us to grow and share these brief previews of what life in the future can be. In addition to thanking our guest today, I want to thank Peter Roy and Demetria Bridges for making this podcast possible. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and encourage others to also join us each week in previewing the possibilities of tomorrow.
Preview of Tomorrow is brought to you by Leading Cities, a global nonprofit driving resilience and sustainability for all by unleashing the potential of the world's cities. Join them at leadingcities.org.